Hello, I'm Michelle Cahill, and this is Expert Q&A, a conversation focused on rethinking the American high school. Today we're talking about teaching and learning and the challenge of delivering on one of XQ's deeply held beliefs that every young person in every neighborhood deserves a chance to learn in deep and powerful ways. We have with us two founding principals from innovative and successful schools that produce tremendous learning gains in their students. Liliana Polo McKenna is the founder of West Brooklyn Community High School in New York City and now the vice president of the New York City Leadership Academy. Derek Pierce is the founder and current principal of Casco Bay High School, an expeditionary learning school in Portland, Maine. Also with us is Monica Martinez, an expert in deeper learning, a member of the White House Commission on Educational Excellence for Hispanics, and the author of the book Deeper Learning, which provides an in-depth look at how 8 public high schools are transforming education. Welcome. At XQ, we believe that high schools should be designed to serve the students who will be attending them. To get us started, Liliana, would you tell us a little bit about West Brooklyn Community High School?
We founded West Brooklyn in 2006. It was a partnership school with Good Shepherd Services. And at its core, the school was designed to bring a staff that held expertise in youth development with the staff that had been trained around rich teaching and learning. About 98% of our students were students of color, and it varied sort of year to year, the breakdown between Latino, African American, Black, Caribbean, and Asian students. About 90% of our students were free and reduced lunch, and all had a negative experience with school.
You know, so many schools that start out with that targeting that population don't go for their regular diploma. And I don't think that's the case.
We actually faced some resistance in being bold enough to say these students will graduate from high school, and many of them will go on, but we'll have choices after that. We had a commitment to serving students who also had less than 10 credits. So in New York State, you need 44 credits to graduate. And so we were very committed to serving the students for whom there were no other options. Initially, our main outcome was to move students, to help them move through this gatekeeper of the high school diploma. And to do that, we knew that we had to create a fundamentally different experience for students who were ages 16 to 20 and had previously been disengaged from school for a variety of reasons, and all were in danger of not graduating from high school.
Derek, could you tell us a bit about Casco Bay? What did you want students to know and be able to do?
I think our hope was that each year we wanted kids to do something they thought that there was no way they possibly could do. We wanted kids to experience the greatness within themselves and forever expand their sense of what's possible for themselves and what's possible for their world as a consequence. We opened in 2005. We have about 400 kids. We are a public school in Portland, Maine. We are limited to about 100 kids per class. So when we've had greater interest than space, we have had a lottery. It's tied to the city's demographics to make sure that we continue to reflect Portland's diversity, which is about 50% free and reduced lunch, 15% special ed, and about 22% English language learners, primarily refugees from Africa and the Middle East. We are built around the 3 pinnacles that came from the Gates Foundation many years ago of rigor, relevance, and relationships. And I think we start with relationships. We feel that kids have to be known deeply and know that they're loved in order to bring forth their best. And then we try to value rigor and relevance equally in schools. We think there are a lot of schools that are pretty good at one or the other, but it is a great challenge to have curriculum that's as rigorous as it is relevant and as relevant as it is rigorous. We have a project-based approach. We engage kids in long-term interdisciplinary projects that result in that ta-da culmination where they're doing something they never thought they possibly could do with the support and around their peers.
That sounds really intriguing. Monica, you've been traveling the country looking for deeper learning in action. Tell us a little bit about what you found.
I'd love to build on the phrase that they really wanted to change their relationship with school. And I saw that in all of the 8 schools that I went to. But not only did they want to change relationship with school, they wanted to change students' relationship with learning. And for that, and you heard this in what Derek was saying, teachers and students both have to be empowered. and everything has to have meaning. And with that, in order to create learners, then teaching has to be about questioning, always pushing students to develop their thinking, and this is going to come through questioning. And so all of the schools in my book, they want students to be able to reflect on their work and think about the choices that they make. And so this becomes a habit of the students because teachers are always asking them, what did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about the topic? What would you do differently? And so kind of like one of the students at Avalon said, is every time I do a project or I complete an assignment, I better be ready to have the teacher ask me, how will I improve that next?
I love listening to all three of you talk about the importance of relationships and of young people's development. And we know that forming identity is such a critical part of adolescence, but also building competencies is another critical task. One of the issues that I think a lot of people grapple with is how does building content knowledge fit together with building other aspects of youth development? How do you create powerful learning experiences that do both?
So when you're sitting with a student and you see them like engaged and asking questions and sort of engaging with their peers, which I think is a great indicator of learning, that embodies youth development. Like I feel like that is when I see youth development in action. I think the moving towards students really owning their learning, I think required for us to be really transparent about, what are the standards, that it doesn't remain sort of a secret in a teacher's planning in their, on their documents, but that it's something that you talk about and that you unpack with students.
I think for us at Casco Bay, academic development and character development are intertwined and integrated all the time. And our expectation is that our faculty are committed to developing citizens who are knowledgeable and well-informed and who are awesome human beings who are going to better the planet. And we're explicit about that. Our curriculum has a social justice component all the time. All of our long-term projects and expeditions doesn't mean it has a particular perspective, but it raises social justice questions that we use for two reasons. One, strategic, and we know that when kids' hearts are engaged as deeply as their mind, they produce work that astounds, and we also know that that's motivating, that when you're engaged heart and head, you're going to be excited to get out of bed in the morning and get to school and further that project.
Just to add to that, Derek, you made me think about sort of the role of assessments and sort of assessment, little a, not big A, that it's not sort of these massive things to fear, but that assessments become just part of the ongoing conversation. So it's both about these are the learning goals that I have, and these might actually be some of the behaviors and the mindset shifts that I might have to make in order to be successful in this particular area.
I was going to say, it's just, it's about having that growth mindset about not just your academic dispositions, but about your character dispositions and about the fact that you can become more persistent and you can learn how to get along with others more appropriately. And those kind of dispositions, which people tend to think as more fixed, can evolve and grow as impressively as your skills with fractions.
You're both inspiring me. And you have a student who's coming into your school and who basically says, I hate math. This is so irrelevant to my life. What is your youth development approach to that student?
It's first about getting to know that kid and not just seeing them as a poor math student, but as a human being who has a certain perspective on math that's the sum of their experiences up to that point, but are not a predictor of where they're going in the future necessarily. And it's finding what that kid is passionate about and helping them gain some confidence and strength there that might be able to be applicable to other areas over time. It's about getting them connected with other peers in the community and having those peers help buoy that kid. It's not one conversation, but it's 1,000 interactions over 1,000 days, helping to mold them into someone who is capable of doing things they didn't think they could do.
I also think it's about shifting what we think about as like, what does learning math look like? I actually remember in our second year, one of our math teachers started sort of experimenting with what math could look like. And I had a student come to me and say, that's not math. I don't know what you think you guys are doing, but that's not math. And it was a student who really had a hard time with math and was sort of worried about what the end game would be. Like, will I learn the things I need to learn? And so there's certainly some relearning and rewiring that needs to happen on the part of the facilitators of the learning, teachers and other staff members, but also on the part of students around what can this look like, because it's been so ingrained over so many years and they haven't been successful in that.
Monica, you were looking at quite a lot of schools. I wondered if you could say something in responding to Derek and Liliana about how do you build skills and content knowledge at the same time?
What I heard them both really talk about was the clear vision they had for what students should be able to know and do, and this broader vision that they have for students as well. They're also integrating the academic and youth development simultaneously, so it's not one or the other, and we always like to think about that in education. Is it this or is it that? And we don't think about both. But all of the schools are so clear. They start with the end in mind about what they want students to know and be able to do. And for that, they really look at a broader set of standards. So what's great about all of these schools is that none of them have said, we're not going to do the Common Core, we're not going to do whatever state standard. When I went to go see their schools, is they said, we're going to do that and we're going to hit that out of the ballpark, but we're going to do more. So like an Impact Academy in Oakland, which is predominantly Latino, they have two sets of outcomes. They have core competencies and 21st century skills, in addition to the state's academic standards. And then to Liliana's point about transparency, these types of standards are embedded in a rubric, just like academic standards would be embedded in a rubric. So when a teacher sits down and says, okay, what do I want students to know and do? He or she is not only thinking about these academic standards, but these other skills as well, and then designing their curriculum for that.
One point that is often brought up to me when people hear about the additional standards for skills like inquiry is, are these sort of separate tracks in school?
It's a good question, because I think that question highlights that tension that the school, they're still feeling 10 years later, which is that we have these skills that we know are really important and that really have to be practiced every single day in every single learning experience that students have. I think how we think about each individual student and the different types of scaffolding each student might need to really be able to tap into those skills in ways that demonstrate mastery continues to be a challenge.
Yeah, it is unquestionably complicated, excruciating, but necessary and vital work. And it's, we haven't talked much about this yet, but it starts with having great faculty who are not just collaborative, but interdependent, whose success depends on one another and who really trust and care about one another's success and want to help bring out the best in their colleagues in the same way they want to bring out the best in their students. So I really think it starts with having faculty having rich and difficult conversations on a daily basis and having the opportunity to have those conversations.
How are schools grappling with the need for rigor?
I'm going to start with some data, because sometimes when people hear project-based, they think, oh, that's cute, but what about the tests? And, fortunately, my fundamental belief has been played out by our kids' work over time, is that if you engage them in deep, meaningful learning over time, the test stuff takes care of itself. It doesn't mean you don't pay any attention to it, but we are the last place to be accused of teaching the test. And our kids have consistently outperformed demographic expectations and state and district average over 10 years on all traditional measures, including the SATs. We've had 98% of our graduates accepted to college. Our dropout rate's under about 1.5%. Our four-year completion rate is up from about 77% to 91% last year. But what matters most to me is the quality of the work that kids do and that they find it meaningful. This year, our entire junior class is going to Detroit, and it's part of a semester-long study of income inequality in the United States. It begins with research papers that they are currently working on. Each student picks an interest within the realm of income inequality that is of particular interest or passion to them, the minimum wage or how we deal with immigrants in our country. The kids then will host a symposium on income inequality where they're going to present their research and defend their research to a panel of local experts. We bring in 20 to 30 folks, and then we start preparing after that symposium for this year going to Detroit. There's no district funding for it. They write grants. And when we're there, when we're in a city, we do two things. One, we provide a service. Our kids will be working in Detroit with an organization called Blight Busters, which is rebuilding neighborhoods in Detroit. And then we do oral histories, and the kids get trained in documentary skills. They write oral histories, and they interview kind of local heroes. So when the kids come back from that trip, then they're creating kind of professional quality pieces of work that we will be showcasing both in Detroit and locally, and helping to tell the personal story of income inequality in a way that they told kind of the policy story through their research in the spring.
That's so terrific on so many levels. Liliana, I know that West Brooklyn has been very creative in the ways that you integrate academics and development and get young people who've been very disengaged to take ownership of their learning. Would you just give us some concrete examples?
West Brooklyn actually has a youth internship coordinator. And that person's role is to really build relationships across, at this point it's the entire city, to provide different types of experiences for students that are paid internships. The way that we've thought about that is that looking at each student as an individual and sort of assessing not only what are their interests, what are their skills, and given what we know and given what they've shared, what type of an internship does this young person need right now? And so in the same way that we would think about scaffolding learning experiences in the classroom, we're thinking about scaffolding learning experiences external to the school, but all in service of really providing them, one, opportunity to have a job. The financial aspect of this is definitely important, but it's also access to different experiences that they may not have had access to otherwise.
Within all this excitement, I want to ask a more conventional question, which relates to Derek's point about the accountability. So I know at West Brooklyn, as you were starting it 10 years ago, New York State was raising graduation requirements, and your students had to pass 5 Regents exams, including one in science. And so I want to ask you about how you thought about getting your students really engaged in science.
So over the past 10 years, the graduation rate for our students, keeping in mind that these are students that were not on track to graduate at all, has been between 70 and 75%. The science question is an interesting one because when we opened, we got an opportunity to build a brand new science lab in the school. And I think that actually motivated some of our staff to really feel like, really owning what learning would look like in there. It also gave us a ton of resources around how to really make it hands-on. I think one of the key pieces around curriculum was, what are the skills that really need to exist across all classrooms? And when we talk about inquiry, we talk about problem solving. We also talked about sort of very concrete reading strategies and learning strategies that enable you to be able to problem solve effectively. And so I think in science that was particularly powerful because students needed to access rigorous text, but they also needed to develop language. They needed to be able to talk to each other about, the content in ways that I think the science really lends itself to doing that.
Monica, how does this resonate with the deeper learning schools that you've studied?
To build on the work that Derek and Liliana talked about, learning has to be meaningful to students. And for it to be meaningful, then, it has to be connected. And that could be connected to other subjects, that could be connected to prior experiences, to their personal life, and then it has to be real. And I heard that in everything that Derek and Liliana said, and certainly this is what happened across all of the 6 schools. And so what most of these schools did was find a way to connect all of the classes. Now, some of the schools did integrated curriculum, but a lot of the schools also used themes as a way to tie the curriculum that the students were doing by grade. And so, at King Middle School, they used sustainability as a theme when they were teaching students about alternative energy. And they used guiding questions. How do we capture and use nature's energy? How can you change energy consumption to improve the world? And when they're exploring these questions, the 8th graders are going to learn, how do you create energy? How is energy conducted? What are alternative forms of energy? How do you collect and analyze data in math and science classes to measure energy? How do you design and build generators and transfer energy? And then in English, they're using their research and writing skills and writing a land use proposal in their social studies class on the use of land for alternative energy. So all of these activities and guiding questions are critical in helping the students develop their skills. But to Liliana's point, it engages them at the same time it's developing their skills.
Both of you have talked about how many of your students came into your schools significantly behind in terms of academics. What was your approach to accelerating the learning?
The assessment upon entry, I think, was key. And when I think about what assessments look like, it was both to assess the skill. So yes, skills around reading, writing, and skills around numeracy. But part of that assessment process also meant uncovering like why students wanted to be there. We looked at it as students are making a choice because it was a real choice to be in school, why they wanted to be there and what they hoped to achieve. And I think sort of marrying those two pieces, again, speaking to having sort of the youth development and teaching and learning approach be very sort of integrated, that's the kind of data that then informed how we created a program over the course of the year. So programs were not created until we had analyzed the data for every single student. There were times where we would meet a student and the report card that they were coming to us with, it was a bunch of zeros and like 100 absences from school. So very little data there to go with. And so what we would have to do is really create opportunities to assess that student, not only when they came in, but in their courses, figure out how do we create check-in points? And so what we learned very quickly was that those had to be very structured. Check-in points with that student, because is it about the skill? Is it about sort of fear of math? Is it about their the fact that school's been very traumatic for this student? That was data that would inform how we thought about teaching and learning, the other 5-6 periods of the day.
Liliana, graduation day at West Brooklyn must have been very emotional.
I can think of one student who, it was actually our first year, and we had rolling admissions. So students would sort of just show up at the door and say, I want to come back to school. I want to be in school. He was 20 years old, lived right in the neighborhood, and it was his 4th high school. And his family was also at the point where they had thrown their hands up, weren't really quite sure what to do. Were sort of leery of what we meant by, we want to partner. Like, let's talk about, the goals for your son. And so when I think about what graduation then looked like for this young man, he must have had 35 people there. Like, it was such a celebration. It was such a defiance of what, he had thought about himself for so many years. He was a young Latino male, and he had already accepted many of the labels that that others had imposed. And to associate sort of this joy and celebration with school, I think was a real turning point. And it was also great for other students to see. But I think about students like that, and he was one of many, where things don't seem like a possibility. And so it's quite a celebration.
Derek, I'm sure you've had students with experiences like this. How have you accelerated learning or closed gaps for the students? I
would certainly echo the philosophy and the approaches that Liliana's talking about. We're heterogeneously grouped, and we do have kids coming in 3 to 4, coming in 3rd or 4th grade level in the high school, or maybe they've had a year of English, or they may be not even literate in their native language. So they come in with a incredible, as much possibility as they have challenge. Our approach is to have a team of teachers working with a team of kids, and having, our biology teachers teaches one class that's called biology. And it's a really complicated prep because they may have kids in there ready to do college-level biology and kids who are coming in at a 3rd or 4th grade reading level, and they have to figure out a way to make sure each of those kids is growing and learning and benefiting from the other kids in the classroom as well as from the teacher's pedagogy. I think it's also about building curricular opportunities that are going to be rich and challenging and meaningful for all of our kids. When we have culminations, everybody's up there doing a presentation of their research. Some may be much more sophisticated than others, but all are pushed to do their very, very best. But it's also about providing some differentiated structures and support. We have a school-wide academic support. There aren't study halls. The whole school has an academic support time for 3 hours each week, and that can be used by teachers and students in a very individualized way depending on where they need the work and where they need the support or where they need the acceleration. So I think the combination of having adults committed to making sure every kid is learning and growing and having some skills in how to do that, plus having some structures that allow you to provide more time and support for those who need it are the core of it.
Those are very powerful strategies. Monica, one of the things that I'm hearing from Liliana and Derek is very non-conventional roles for teachers.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on it, Michelle, and a lot of what Derek said is really about the teacher changing the role to be that coach and the facilitator. But the time, because really it's the time that Derek was just talking about, the individual time that teachers are spending with students. Now, what's great about all these schools is that they want students to productively struggle. They want to take away the stigma of failure. They don't have remedial classes because they want to show there's high expectations, but they want to work on the feedback piece. So for every one of the projects that students are going to do, most often the teachers demonstrate or show them what a quality work product looks like. And the student goes about and does that work product, whether it's a group project or individual project, and then they get feedback on that. And they're allowed to revise that as many times as they need to. Think about the time you have to build into the curriculum for that feedback to encourage. So it puts teachers into the coaching role, and it helps students dig deep into the discipline as well as these skills that they need to catch up. And usually it helps them develop their communication skills and their critical thinking. But the other part in terms of how the teacher role changes is that they certainly all use assessment, and they might do a formal assessment as in a quiz or a test, but they're constantly checking in with students. They're checking in to see the degree of understanding that they have. Because again, it's all about the conversation.
I think what you're bringing up is something that's very concrete and very important, which is the notion that you're very intentionally using time and very intentionally building in opportunities for collaboration among teachers and partners, and teachers, partners, and students. And that feedback is a part of all of it. Liliana, you are now very much working on principal development. What's the role of the school leader in actually making all of this happen?
The role of a school leader is to create the conditions for the adults in the building, the staff, because some students are adults too, for the staff to be able to achieve that greatness. I think about, we spent our first summer, we spent about 4 weeks like intensively planning curriculum, and then the students came, and then we had to start over. But that sort of building in, I think, Derek, you called it the culture of revision is so important, and how as a leader you publicly demonstrate that yourself. So that public learning piece, the willingness to really like roll up your sleeves and sit down and plan with teachers, both to support them and ensure that you understand what their learning needs are, but to also deeply understand what it takes to make this happen across classrooms.
Before we close, I'd like to ask each of you to reflect on what student-centered learning really means.
So when I think about how folks are defining student-centered, it's as much about the structures that exist across the school, whether it's how the time that you've allocated for, how long classes, or how long students are out in internships, or, what structures you have for students and teachers to meet together. Drilling down all the way down to what are the mindsets that adults and students need to have to really support this idea.
I think one piece for me is making sure that your school's largest, most important rituals reflect its deepest values and highest aspirations. For one example, right before the holidays each year, we have a solstice assembly. We spend that whole hour wrapped as a community, and we have one question. What are you grateful for in our community for which you want to offer thanks? Any kid can stand up, any staff member can stand up, and in a group of 400, actually probably 450, and just offer thanks and appreciation. And in December, we had a kid stand up and say, this is my second junior year, and I'm super grateful that I get to meet a whole new cohort of kids because I'm, a guy who essentially stayed back was saying how much he appreciated being a part of a community.
Yeah, it's a very poignant conversation we're having here. I'm going to characterize it by the first two questions Avalon, a teacher-run school, asked their students. And they asked their incoming students, what do you want to learn? And it starts with wanting to know what your students want to learn and how they learn. And then the second question they asked the students is, what do you have to offer to teach to others? And they're recognizing that students come with assets and that they come with knowledge and they come with skills. And so they're setting the foundation for a very respectful culture of what everyone has to offer as learners.
With that, I'd like to thank Liliana, Derek, and Monica for their insights, for this deep and powerful conversation, and for the challenges that you've posed to all of us as we work on rethinking the American high school. We know that there are a lot of XQ Challenge team members out there who have questions for these experts. Join us on Twitter now to keep the conversation going. Use the hashtag XQExpertSeries. XQ Expert Series. Thanks, everyone.